Okay, our Armed Virginia sloop from Model Shipways just arrived today, so we're going to go through the box here, make sure all the parts and pieces are here, everything that's supposed to be in there is, and we're going to go ahead and label some of these pieces so we know which piece specifically goes to what part on the plans. And this is a good time to make sure you read through the instruction booklet completely so you have a good understanding of how to put this together. In doing so, as I read through the instructions, I found that they were actually very, very scant, and there was an expectation of previous experience, and I almost exclusively relied on the practicum from Lock Street Shipyard. At this part of the construction, we're preparing the keel. We've attached the stern post, the false keel, and this is a very critical part of construction. It took about 28 hours, just this portion alone, preparing this keel. As you can see, we've properly measured and marked all of the lines. We've carved in our ribette line, goes right along the bearding line there. That was something that was very confusing when trying to just go by the instructions that came with this alone. But the College of Model Shipbuilding practicum by Lock Street Shipyard was very clear on that. There's a very precise depth that you have to carve into the keel, and that was something that was explained very nicely in there. Also, you can see the bulkheads here. We've measured and marked those and trimmed those so that they fit properly, so they'll fit in at a nice 90-degree angle to the keel once we're ready to apply those. Also, we've beveled the sides of those so they can accept the ship planking properly once it's time to start the planking process. As you can see here, we're using a tool from Model Shipways that allows us to glue on the bulkheads at a very precise 90-degree angle to the keel itself. And that's very, very critical that we get that at a very precise angle at this point. If this portion of the construction process is rushed or not done precisely, then it'll throw off the entire ship once we start the planking process. And at that point, it's a little bit too late. So right here, we're just applying the bulkheads one at a time, and we let each one dry about 30 minutes and then apply the next. And you can see here, this is actually in the process here where all the bulkheads are glued on, the glue is dry, and we're getting ready to start the planking process here very shortly. Another little angle there where you can see the beveling on the sides of the bulkheads, how each one is angled precisely so that it can accept the planking of the ship, which is the next part of the process, and we'll get into that on the next part of on the next video. Again, you can see the exact measurements up and down of the keel at a 90-degree angle to those bulkheads. Again, anyone that's interested in getting into ship modeling, I highly recommend Lock Street Shipyard. Their practicums are for this particular one's the beginner model, and it walks you through step by step and makes a process that would otherwise be very difficult very easy, especially for someone like me as a beginner that wants to get into this hobby. It made it very nice and easy. I really encourage anybody to go to lockstreetshipyard.com, check out Bob Hunt's practicums, and see if there's something in there for you. I know for me it's made it much more enjoyable. This is a model that I probably would have put down within the first couple of hours if it wasn't there for me to follow along. So you can see there the little ribette line carved in. Right in there also a little bit of carving along the bearding line. That's going to come in handy a little bit later on once we apply the planking in the next video, where we'll document some of that. See that beveling on the bulkheads there, so that planking rests on those bulkheads nice and easy in a nice line. In our last video we talked about permanently gluing on the bulkheads to the keel, and therefore we have our framing here, which our planking is ultimately going to rest upon. It's very important that that planking rest flatly against the entire bulkhead if at all possible. And due to the curvature of that planking, if we just leave these bulkheads completely flat, then only a tiny portion of that plank is going to rest against it. So what we're doing here, we're just filing away the edges, the flat edges on these bulkheads to ensure, as you can see right here, that the full plank is going to rest fully against that bulkhead. So once again, we're checking it. filing a little bit to make sure that a maximum surface on that plank will be able to be glued to this bulkhead right here. And it's very important that these each one of these is custom done. That's why we're going to measure here with just a sample piece of planking to make sure that it's resting evenly and fully along these bulkheads here. Right here I'm just kind of using a file. I've already done most of the cutting and shaping, but I'm just using a file here to fine-tune and adjust, and then test it with this planking right here, just to make sure that it's fully resting and contacting that bulkhead with the maximum service possible. Once we're done with this portion right here of beveling these bulkheads with that angle, then at this point I'm using my sanding block and just to sand all of these to make sure every bulkhead is even, there's no bulges or anything like that. We only really get one shot to do this, since once we put the planking on, it's impossible to go back and fix that error. So just making sure that everything is nice and level and even and beveled at this point here. Now we'll make sure that they're all even. As you can see, we've finished putting all the frames on the keel, all the bulkheads and everything. Finished the transom area, and we're getting ready to put the decking on. And also, prior to putting the planking on, we have to put these little bow filler pieces right here. One of the things that I ran into on the Arm Virginia sloop, the instructions that come with it aren't really very complete at all. It's just kind of a general overview in the plan sheets themselves, and for the novice model builder like myself, it really wasn't enough for me to go on. Maybe an experienced model shipbuilder, they would have been adequate, but for me they simply weren't. So I ended up enrolling in the Lock Street Shipyard College of Model Shipbuilding, and this is actually the freshman course. And Bob Hunt, who owns Lock Street Shipyard, sells these practicums, which are super detailed instructions on putting together the Arm Virginia sloop here. Very, very detailed, and that has actually helped out tremendously, and that's allowed me to actually get to this stage here with relatively no problem, where I'd actually gotten stuck quite early on in the process prior to receiving Bob's practicum. Again, that's the Lock Street Shipyard. Very helpful. And I'll actually include a web address on here so you can go check it out. And hopefully if you're thinking about getting into model shipbuilding, you can enroll as well in the Model Shipbuilding College, freshman course like I have at the Lock Street Shipyard. Anyway, I'll post another log entry here as we begin putting on the planks, which is what we're getting ready to do now. Here's a good shot of the bow filler piece right here. This was an interesting piece to build right here, because on the plan sheet it's simply three one-dimensional triangle shapes that we need to ultimately shape into this three-dimensional figure out of a square block. So that was kind of interesting to figure out how to put that together there. And as you can see here, we've attached the whale strake, and this was a critical piece to install just right with the right measurements here relative to the false deck that you see that we've installed there. Everything as far as the planking and the bulwarks is going to be based off of the position of this whale strake, and that's what they call this main plank that you see right there. Everything, like I say, is going to be based on that, so it was important to get that just right. Here you can see we've got the transom, the framing to the transom installed right here. We've painted it black inside just so no light shines in there when the model's completed, so you can't see bare wood. And right there we've also installed filler blocks on that very last bulkhead so that it can accept the planking, which is going to make a radical 90-degree bend up the very back side there. Another shot of the whale right here. You can see that line that's been drawn down the middle of it, and that's a measurement there that from the false deck that everything's going to be based off of here in the future. That's one of the important things that I'm learning here at the College of Model Shipbuilding, lockstreetshipyard.com, is the relations between things we're doing now and things that are to come. And that's something that's hard for me as a beginner to really understand yet, but I'm starting to kind of get the hang of it, to know the relationships between two different things, like what I do now versus later. Very important lesson learned here is do not rush anything when constructing these models. When we rush, that's when mistakes are made. I've had to go back and redo a couple things because of it. At this point, we've got our waterways installed, and we're done with the frame. We've installed our decking and everything else, and now we're getting ready to construct the gun ports and finish that up so we can finally get on to planking. We're about 80 hours into this build at this time, and it's going along very smoothly, very nicely at this point. And I'm very excited to get onto the decking portion. That's the part I've been looking forward to on this particular model, and hopefully that practicum is going to make that much easier, because that's something that's been kind of a mystery to me so far as a novice builder. Again, this is the freshman course, the Armed Virginia Sloop, for the Lock Street Shipyard practicums by Bob Hunt. They've been very helpful, like I said. Again, this is Tim Brooks, Armed Virginia Sloop, signing off, and I'll see you again soon once we get the planking going. Right now we're working on the first layer of planking. As you can see here, we're using cyanoacrylate glue for this level of planking, or CA for short. This can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge because of the nature of this type of glue. It sets very quickly. It's essentially the same thing as super glue. And in certain cases here, I struggled with it setting too quickly, and then it actually wouldn't bind the glue to the bulkheads itself. I'd have to scrape it and start over again. Now, based on our practicum from lockstreetshipyard.com, we know to measure the distance between the whale and the keel. And once we do that, we can tell that there's a much greater distance in the stern portion of the hull than at the stem portion. And because of this, if we don't trim our planking, if we don't make the planks wider in the rear than at the stem, then we're going to come up with a much more bowed effect. So based on this and what we learn in our practicum, we're going to use what's called the spiling technique. And as a result of that, each and every plank that we put on this ship is going to be unique. No other plank will be exactly like that one. We're going to customize each and every plank that we put down here, again using the spiling technique. We're going to use a different technique when we put on the second layer, but for this first layer, that's what we're using. And we started out the first layer of planking all the way at the top of the bulwarks. Then we worked our way down, framed out our gun ports, and we've made it about halfway down. At that point, then we switched to the keel area in this first plank or strake, which is known as the garboard strike. And we're going to work our way back upwards, and then we're going to have one last piece. It's kind of like a key piece to fit in there that's going to be unique unto itself, and presented quite a challenge how to mathematically figure out how to cut that particular plank to fit exactly in like the last piece of a puzzle. So you can see here, we've got to make sure that not only we glue the one plank to the other below it, but we also have to make sure that we get that glue on those bulkheads and that these planks sit flush with the bulkheads as well. That's why we did all of the work prior to this on the bulkheads earlier, as you saw in the last episode. So we're just going to put that CA along there, get a nice snug fit there, and there's always a little bit of excess there, so we just have to wipe that off with that paper towel that I've been using. One thing I've had to get used to with working on this model here is just having that super glue sticky finger syndrome, but it comes right off here once you wash your hands. So you can see here, we've got this particular plank went at the very rear of this ship there's a radical 90-degree bend in these planks, and you really have to soak it in water first, and I used a plank bender to get that 90-degree angle. Otherwise these planks will break if you don't soak them first. This is that very last plank that I was talking about that had to fit in exactly like the last piece in a puzzle there, and it was very interesting the shape that I ended up with on this plank so that it fit in exact. And it was also interesting to compare the last plank on this side with the last plank on the opposite side of the hole here to see how different they were or how similar, and to see if they matched closely, which they actually did on this particular one. Although we're using the spiling technique on this last plank, I actually had to use a little bit of trial and error, and it probably took the longest out of all of the planks that I've worked on as far as this first layer goes, but a little bit of trial and error, and it fit in there perfectly. Being that this is the freshman course in the College of Model Shipbuilding, LockStreetShipyard.com, the spiling technique that we're learning for this first layer, and also on the second layer we're going to be learning another technique, that isn't something that's just specific to this particular model. It's actually something that we're learning to go on to, say, larger model ships. We're going to be using the same techniques in basically any other type of ship that we want to build that requires planking, like the sophomore course is going to be the USS Constitution. So these are skills that we're actually going to be developing that will go on to serve us in any other types of ships that one wants to build after this. So that's something that I was very pleased to learn. So you can see here we've got our almost finished first layer of planking, and I say almost finished because we still have to sand it and fill in any gaps that there may be. You can't really see any right there, but you can see where it definitely needs to be sanded to a nice smooth surface so that it will be ready to accept the second layer of planking. But before we get to the second layer of planking, we're actually going to be finishing out the bulwarks on the outside and inside. Then we're going to paint the top half of this hull, and then it'll be ready for the second layer of planking, which once that's put on there gives a very, very nice appearance to this ship. Well, that's all the time that we have today. I have enjoyed sharing my ship build log with you, and I hope you've enjoyed watching. Anyway, join me for part 4 where we'll be finishing the bulkheads. As you can see,